Hello, my name is James Pope from Turner Pope Investments. We would like to welcome you all today to the second in a series of webinars that we will be putting on in conjunction with our friends at Vox Markets. Now today we have David Budd from Genedrive, who will be updating us on the progress that the company has made. So without further delay, I will hand you over to David Budd.
So good afternoon. My name's Dave Budd. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Genedrive in Manchester. I'd like to thank Turner Pope and Vox Markets for inviting me this afternoon to talk about the company and highlight some of the things that make us world leaders in the development of molecular diagnostic tests. We only have a short time today, so too short to cover the company in detail, but my intention is to give you a quick product overview, then a more detailed look at two different very innovative tests which we're in the process currently of launching. So we are a point-of-care molecular diagnostic company that has designed and developed a handheld instrument, which is also called Genedrive, which we develop tests for. And it can be used to make decisions based on genetic information, which could be the genetics of a person or a bacteria or a virus. The Genedrive system is small, about the size of an iPad mini, and uses a one-time disposable cartridge, which you can see there in the picture on the lower right side of the image. We use PCR as a chemistry, which takes minute amounts of genetic material and multiplies it up to amounts that can be analyzed with an instrument. Users can get the results displayed on the screen, and we also make a smartphone application, which you can use to transmit results. Typical times are anywhere from 27 minutes up to 90 minutes, depending on what we're targeting. Cost of margins on the product are quite attractive. I've listed some on there. Unit costs of around £500 to make, and tests cost us in the £5 to £8 range. And pricing for tests depends on the country and the test, of course, but anything from around £15 for an HCV test up to £80 for our military applications. The Genedrive's unique size and its price gets us into lots of markets around the world that other companies simply can't access. So this slide highlights our core product portfolio. Now the items in the copper color are the products that are currently commercially available, and the ones in blue are the products that we have in development. So from the left at the top, the 5 tests there are all point of care and run on the Genedrive system. And the one on the far right, the 96 SARS-CoV-2, is our new high throughput coronavirus test, which is designed to run on third-party PCR platforms supplied by other companies, as you see on the bottom there. So as we just take a walk through them from left to right, the first one there is the antibiotic-induced hearing loss test. Now we've developed that to screen babies for a genetic mutation that can cause them to go deaf when they're given antibiotics. It's a truly remarkable test, actually, and we're the only ones in the world providing this in the point of care. Next along is our hepatitis C test. We use that to scan for the presence of hepatitis genetic material in patients. And if they're positive, we can identify them as being infective and eligible for treatment. We sell this into Africa and India. And last month, we actually received World Health Organization approval for the product. The next item along is US military detection. It's actually not a test, but a range of tests that we provide to them. The idea here is that soldiers can carry our portable system out into the field and test for biowarfare agents. The US military recently confirmed with us their intention to enter into a long-term supply contract following a 4-year development program. And they're intending to buy approximately 500 systems over the next 3 years. It's another very interesting and unique opportunity for Genedrive. The fourth one along is tuberculosis in blue. Test is still in development. It's designed for low and middle income markets, and because that's really where the burden of tuberculosis disease is. We're midpoint in its development, and we're expecting that around 2022. The fifth item there is the point of care Genedrive version of our coronavirus PCR test that we recently launched. I'm not planning to go into any detail today. The product, as I mentioned, still in development. It will have similarities, of course, to our high throughput version, but there are changes that we will be making to deal, for example, with different types of sample inputs, as well as a faster time to result. And then the last item there on the right-hand side is our coronavirus PCR assay, which was designed for high throughput testing, as I mentioned, on third-party platforms. Clearly, this is a product that's attracted quite a lot of investor excitement and interest in Genedrive over the past few months. So in the presentation, my intention is to really cover the two products that have the red circles around them. Our coronavirus test and our antibiotic-induced hearing loss test, really because these are the two products which we are in process of commercially launching into the market. So the photograph here shows a high throughput PCR system, and the hand there is holding what we call a 96 well plate. So these are 96 patient tubes in the plate, each containing an individual patient test. And they get loaded in the PCR instrument, and you'll get a clinical result on 96 patients, generally in around 2 hours. These instruments are provided by a number of different manufacturers in the market, and we call these open platforms because the user can source tests from a variety of different vendors. They're commonly found in hospital settings, so there's a very large existing installed base on which we can sell. Now, there are also what we would call closed platforms. They're made by typically blue chip diagnostic companies like Roche and Abbott, where if you have their instrument, you have to buy the test from them in order to analyze your patients. But our market and our discussion here today is really centered around these open platform opportunities. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail now on the Genedrive high throughput coronavirus test. And I think many investors have awareness of what's going on in the UK with testing and with test companies, but clearly the manufacture, design, and supply and use of coronavirus testing or tests is a global phenomenon. And there are many suppliers of COVID PCR tests and also many suppliers of COVID antibody tests. And just so you're aware, the difference between the two, PCR tests, what we do, looking for active infection in patients, and antibody tests, the promise there is that they would screen for previous infection and hopefully someday immunity. Now, I think without exception, other suppliers don't actually supply a test per se. They supply a frozen reagent kit. So, and I put that image there on the lower left. The end user has to thaw it from the freezer, take a combination of these different colored vials from the kit that you see there, and then make up a number of tests that they need for that morning or that afternoon by following a recipe, right? So it's essentially a process that's ripe for error, lots of work to make hundreds or thousands of tests for a day, and certainly an area that can lead to test failure and things going wrong. So what we have worked with our manufacturing partners at Cytiva to create is a much better solution. On the right there, you can see what we've created is a COVID-19 PCR bead. And it's essentially a freeze-dried, fully functional test for one patient. And no one else in the world has done this. And because it's freeze-dried, the process of freeze-drying makes it temperature stable, which allows us the freedom to easily send this to different places around the world that frankly are in real need of testing. Some of the financials are here on the slide. Target price for these, 8 to 10 pounds per test, obviously times 96 given the number of patients in a tube, 60% gross margin, and manufacturing capacity with Cytiva, 10,000 tests per hour, and clearly the more you work, the longer you run, the more tests you can make. The test, frankly, couldn't be simpler. All the lab needs to do is add the extracted patient sample to the plate and mix it and put it on their 96 well testing instrument, and they will get 96 patient results in 100 minutes. So really, really straightforward. And then we've also created a nice software tool called Genedrive Exporter that takes all the data off the third-party instrument, does the interpretation, and displays it in this sort of color-coded graphic for them. So very, very simple, very easy. This is the data related to the product performance. Absolutely great data, great sensitivity. That means that it detects COVID-19 if it's there, and great specificity. means that you that if it's not there, you're not detecting it, i.e., it doesn't detect non-COVID related viral infections. And the limit of detection there on the bottom, half a copy per microliter, very low, means that we can pick up low-level infections. So this really is truly a gold standard product that we have created together with Cytiva. The next slide gives you a comparison of the workflows. I've listed a few different vendors across the top there. Certest is a Chinese-based company, Altona based in Germany, Novacyte on the right there, a UK-based company, which many of you will know. And as I mentioned, because our test format is unique, it doesn't really matter what companies I would put on this slide. The number of steps that a user has to go through in order to detect and generate a result is less with our solution than any other company. Some more competitor comparison information here. Again, another range of companies across the top and some indicators down the left there. Can you ship cold chain, which is important to accessing the world? Can you ensure good product performance by targeting multiple gene targets? Do you have controls built in for the user to give them confidence? Is it easy to use? You know, and I've essentially shaded green who's better amongst these performance criteria. And again, across the range of companies, we're better. And don't forget that when I'm saying this, these are all reagent kits, right? We are the only ones with a single physical, functional, intact test. So really important and unique to us. This is a global market, and our ability to get markets around the world is important to us as a company. Now, Europe may be stabilizing in terms of death rates going down, but why is that? It's really because of social distancing and because various countries are testing like crazy. So if you're of the opinion that COVID-19 is on its way out sometime soon, I'd invite you to visit this website, ourworldindata.org. Lots of interactive graphs, but this one shows the number of new coronavirus infections over time. And you can select whatever countries you want to put on here. Now, the darker lines at the bottom, those are countries that do a higher percentage of testing on their population versus others. And the red ones at the top do less. And so a few things become immediately evident. I think the first thing is that countries that do a lot of testing can, with other measures, start to bring infection under control. So we can see that. Secondly, countries that have escalating COVID-19 cases, i.e. the ones in red, are not doing enough testing. And this is one of the reasons that they're not able to reduce their transmission. And the third thing is there are still the vast majority of countries around the world where COVID infection continues to increase and escalate. So COVID-19 has not gone away and is not going away anytime soon. And if ever there was a graphic that could satisfy you of that case, I think this should be it. Most of the world is very deep in this problem and will remain so. And many of the countries that we're targeting as a business continue to have high and escalating COVID-19 infection problems. This is a little bit of an outline of our current and our future distribution intentions. Now, the right-hand side also gives you some of the regulatory information that obviously is also important besides a distribution agreement in order to sell in various countries. So we received our CE mark on the 22nd of May, around 3 weeks ago, and that allows us to distribute product into the upper section of this list here where we have distribution contracts, but they are all European countries. We currently have tests out for validation with our distribution partners and with end users, and feedback from that has so far been positive. As you work down the list, we have applied for World Health Organization emergency use listing. I can't comment on how long that takes because the WHO does not communicate that back when you apply. But the combination ultimately of WHO approval and country-specific approvals certainly is what we need to get into these African regions. I do think it's worth pointing out that I don't personally think that WHO approval is a must-have in order to sell into Africa. We certainly see various African countries currently procuring and making their own decisions in the absence of WHO approvals. Then a little bit further down within the slide there, the Middle East, India, they've also got country-specific registrations, and I'll confirm that we have applied or are engaged in the registration process currently in India. And then right towards the bottom, we've got the USA, South America, and Mexico, also potentially extremely attractive markets for us areas where COVID-19 infection really is not in control at all. We have applied for emergency use authorization with the FDA, so we are in process there. Again, not really possible for us to give timelines. And then there will be, again, country-specific processes for the South American countries, Mexico, et cetera. But as of today, we have not got distribution channels established into South America and Mexico. So we haven't actually physically applied for anything there as of yet. Okay, so I think ultimately, look, this is a good, accurate summary of where we are as a company and why we have every right to be excited about our prospects here. We've got a unique product with features that I think are very valuable to end users, great product performance, right price, good distribution, good manufacturing and scalability, routes to market established and establishing more as we speak. The product has been approved in Europe and we're working on more jurisdictions. And ultimately, this is a very large market with big potential and limited price sensitivity at this point of time. So all of these things give us the confidence that we can make a great business from this. We are encouraged with the progress to date, and we do look forward to updating you as we committed in the very near future. Okay, I'm now going to move on to a Genedrive point of care test, which we call antibiotic-induced hearing loss. The product is actually formally called Genedrive MT-RNR1 ID kit, which I think we'll all admit doesn't really roll off the tongue. So we call it antibiotic-induced hearing loss. And I have to say that in my entire professional working life in the diagnostic industry, no product really has made my my heart beat and grow a little bit more than this product, because it's so rewarding to hear back when your product has identified children and really changed the course of the child's life as a result of using your test. The background of this test is that a small percentage of children, 500, suffer permanent lifelong hearing loss when they're given certain antibiotics. In this case, it's gentamicin. And it's because they have a genetic mutation called RNR1, which is where the product name comes from, that causes the cells on their inner ear to essentially physically look a little bit like bacterial cells. So when the child's given antibiotics, the antibiotics essentially attack these cells and kill them. They don't grow back, unfortunately, and the child suffers lifelong deafness. Now, a genetic test has been available from selected hospital laboratories for many years, but because it takes several days to get an answer back from these types of facilities, it's really not a useful solution for emergency care. So you'll have an infant that just after being born gets moved over to neonatal intensive care. They might have fever, they might have sepsis or some type of infection, and they need to be given antibiotics within an hour of being admitted. And the first course of antibiotics in the UK is gentamicin. Now, as I mentioned, the types of testing that will be available from the hospital genetics lab isn't really fit for purpose, simply because they can't return results fast enough. So we work together with the NHS to develop this test, which allows nurses to generate essentially a genetic screen of a child for the mutation in 27 minutes. And if they get a positive result, then the child can be given an alternative therapy. And Genedrive is the very first company in the world to develop a genetic test for rapid testing in this sort of environment. So we are very, very pleased and excited about this. The workflow is very simple and maybe in some ways analogous to what we hope we might be able to achieve with coronavirus testing on the Genedrive. Essentially, for antibiotic-induced hearing loss, the baby will get admitted and the nurse will take a swab from the inside of the baby's cheek to get a sample of their cells. These get resuspended in a buffer, they get inserted into the cartridge, and the Genedrive cartridge is inserted into the front of the system. The nurse presses the start button, and then we get a result in 27 minutes. The result can be displayed on the screen, positive or negative, or it can be downloaded into the LIS system of the hospital. It is a really revolutionary approach to doing genetic screening of children. The benefits, I think, are clear, both in health outcome and in cost. Now, curiously, the test itself isn't actually a diagnostic test in the true sense of the term. It's what we would call a screening test, right? So all of the babies, or most of the babies admitted to neonatal intensive care, would need to be tested for the mutation. So though the incidence of the mutation is quite low, in this case, the UK, 1 in 500, around 90,000 babies a year would need to be tested in order to find the ones that have the mutation. And in doing so, you'd save the hearing of approximately 180 babies in the UK, compared to the test not being available, of course. And we've done detailed health economic modeling with the NHS team, and you always get a positive case versus the cost of babies being fitted with bilateral cochlear implants, not to mention the better health comes, of course, of retaining your hearing. So again, market opportunity, Genedrive, only ones in the world doing this test. 90,000 babies admitted a year into neonatal intensive care in the UK. Approximately 85% of those would get put on gentamicin and probably eligible for screening with our test. So if you just take a population number and expand that to Europe and the US, for example, you get a Western world market opportunity of something around 1.25 million tests per year. And then depending on how you go to market, whether you go through a distributor or whether you engage the end users directly, you're looking at something between 35 to 50 pounds per test to Genedrive on each sale. And again, based on the mutation frequency of 1 in 500, you're saving 2,500 to 3,000 babies in those markets from going deaf. And you get a global market, total available market of between 40 and 65 million pounds a year. Again, depending on how you go to market through distributors or direct. So extremely attractive and interesting market for us. Clinical performance, as you'd expect, excellent, 100% sensitivity and specificity in our CE marking trials. And I think it really goes to show the quality that we have in our tests and in the Genedrive platform itself. So moving on to the last slide, again, this is a world's first unique product, great performance. Products currently under evaluation in Manchester and Liverpool hospitals, and we're planning to launch this in the autumn once they're finished. Some of the performance evaluation work did slow down a little bit because of the COVID outbreak. Manchester has continued, and my understanding is Liverpool is planning to resume shortly. We signed a distribution agreement with Inspiration Healthcare, another AIM listed company. And again, we plan to commercially put this into the market in the autumn. And I think the test really resonates with people. If your son or daughter is admitted into neonatal intensive care, this is the sort of product that you'd want in there to keep them safe. And if you can imagine markets, like North American market, which is quite litigious, if you had the incidence of a child going deaf because of gentamicin treatment, and there was a test available that could have prevented it, you can imagine that in that environment, it all sort of kicks off, and there would be problems. So I think a great long-term example and a long-term driver for Genedrive adoption. Okay. So that was a quick run through two of our active programs that we're currently in the process of launching. I'm acutely aware, and I share everyone's excitement in the launch of our COVID-19 test, but we're also excited about our ability to continue and develop and commercialize our point of care portfolio. There's lots of information for the products that I didn't cover on our two websites, genedrive.com and genedriveplc.com. I invite you to go and visit there and read about the things that we've been working on. Okay, thank you very much.
David, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. That's much appreciated. As you can imagine, we've had quite a few questions coming in during the webinar. If it's okay, what I'm going to do is run through some of these questions now, and if you could be good enough to answer them, that would be great.
Do my best.
So, the first question that we've had in, what have the results been in evaluations since CE marking for the COVID PCR test, and when can we expect you to announce orders?
Okay, so a pointed question to start with, I guess. So listen, after CE marking, we made a batch of about 60,000 tests, and we've now got tests out into markets: South Africa, Spain, Italy, Germany, India, etc. The main feedback I would say is that, people can't really believe how easy it is to use. I've said I believe the test is better, and it's certainly a unique product, and people haven't really experienced that before. So you can tell someone it's easy, but then when they actually experience it and use it, it's a different matter. So we see marked on the 22nd of May, and the week after that we were able to get things out. So we're only a fortnight in, so we're not in a position yet of reporting sales orders, and I think most people would appreciate that. Um, the process of purchasing a diagnostic product, is different than consumer products, like different than a car, right? Um,
Yeah.
and users have to assure themselves that it works, and they have to assure themselves that it's safe, and they don't do that just because you say it is. So it needs to be put through its paces in all of these places. But personally, I think it's amazing what we've been able to deliver. In such a short period of time, and I don't see any reason why this won't translate to a significant business for us. But I'd already communicated that we'd expected orders in June. So as a minimum, we're due an update early July. End of June is our end of our fiscal year, so we're updating at that point, anyways. And obviously, if anything significantly price sensitive happens before that, we would update the market as well.
Okay, superb. Leading on from that, I have a question that says, have you had any negative reaction of feedback from users so far for the COVID PCR tests?
Negative. Well, I'm gonna say no. Like since we see Mark, we continue to validate the test across a range of PCR platforms. There are a range of them in the marketplace that we're working our way across. Negative feedback. I would say maybe the only maybe I'll classify it as a headwind because I don't want you to read anything negative into that. But I think on some of the third-party instruments, the software systems that sit on them aren't brilliant in order to read our melt curve chemistry, right? So I didn't really talk about it in the slide, but one of the slides in there I showed a little graphic of a 96 well plate results. Our software team actually developed a little software app called the Genedrive Exporter, which takes the raw data off the instrument and just analyzes it really quickly and displays it. Because clearly, if the resident software on the system isn't brilliant, we want people to have like a really seamless, efficient experience with the product, right? The whole design of the product is around efficiency and ease of use, and so we want that experience as well on the software side.
Okay. I have a question here. Can you please tell us about the manufacturing capacity for the COVID test? You stated 10,000 tests per hour. Is that in theory, or is that a practical manufacturing capacity?
Okay. Well, the manufacturing process itself is actually like a two-stage process, right? There's a first stage where we just make beads, and they get stored as like an intermediary product, and then we can take the beads and we can dispense them into the plates depending on the type of plates that the user wants, right? So the manufacture rate of the beads is 10,000 an hour, and so yes, you could do 80,000 in an 8-hour working shift, but clearly, two weeks in, this isn't our primary worry, right? We're not at that manufacturing rate, clearly. I think the positive thing is we have that capacity. It can be increased by putting on additional shifts or more people, that sort of stuff. And I think the key thing is that we've got a partner in place with Cytiva that has a validated and scalable manufacturing business, and we both agreed as companies that we will work together to drive this business. So I think it puts us in a good position.
Okay. Another question here asking about what progress has been made in the development of the point of care COVID PCR test.
Okay. Well, I mean, I didn't cover that. Obviously, I made a couple of comments at the top of that presentation. Like of course, we're working on it. The reason that we were able to get our 96 well version out, in 9 weeks, which again, if you haven't never worked in a diagnostic company, it is astounding. Is that we had every employee working 7 days a week, for 9 weeks on it, and you don't have a bandwidth in the our size to do both of those things at the same time. So now that we've got the 96 well version out, we continue to work, as I mentioned, on validating across other platforms, and our R&D team is now also starting to work on the point of care version. It is a dynamic market, the point of care world, and I think there's a lot of things that we've done in our 96 well version which can translate across to the point of care one. But I do think the dynamics of that market are very different than a central lab testing office, and the user will want something different. So, for example, we have a 100-minute result for our 96 samples. A point of care user doesn't want to wait 100 minutes. So, we have experience in doing faster assays. Our HCV assay is similar to high throughput COV at 90 minutes, but our AIHL assay, which I just talked about, is only 27 minutes. So we have ways to get to faster assays. Making things faster generally means making them less sensitive. And it really depends on the balance of those two from the user standpoint. And then there's been lots of discussion, lots of literature, lots of publications, and lots of really interesting things developed very recently around sample input and the types of samples that could be used. And so I think that's another thing for point of care. We'd like to look at what other sort of sample types we can put in beyond the standard swabs that are used in the 96 well version.
Okay. As you can imagine, we've had quite a few questions about the recent placing that you did. There's one here that asks about the last fundraise. You offered shares at 80p when the market price was more than twice that. Do you regret doing that now?
Do I regret doing it? Well, I don't think regret's not the right word. I don't think. Listen, nothing's perfect, and maybe there's things we could have done differently. But I tried to explain in the placing announcement sort of the dynamics around why that happened, and really, as we started our fundraise, the share price rose very, very strongly, very quickly over the course of that week while we were engaged with institutional holders. And the price was being driven, I think, just because of general COVID market sentiment, some of our news flow, which obviously from a regulatory standpoint we have to put out in a timely fashion, and I think importantly as well because the vast majority of our existing holders were discussing the fundraise with us, or institutional holders I should say, were discussing the fundraise with us, so they were insiders, and that can create a bit of a weird dynamic in the market because the supply and demand of shares is not normal, right? So it was an odd situation.
Sorry, I think it's important to point out, isn't it, that to raise money isn't a 24-hour process if you're dealing with institutions. It's quite a long-winded process, and these people want to speak to you, so they may well be inside for a number of days before the placing is announced.
Yeah, or longer. Listen, I'm going to pick a number out of the air. I don't know if it's right, but we probably had about 30 institutions or something like that, right? We did about 30 presentations over the course of the week, so it was a very, 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 very busy week, right? And so in retrospect, I guess, well, what else could you have done? You could have canceled the placing and tried again to get a higher price, but of course the risk is there that you're not successful, and it's in my mind, not the greatest show of faith with the institutions that, frankly, you want to support you, right? So there's just a reality to and a market dynamic to where we were. But I think most critically, we were poised to go into an opportunity that we believe is really important for the company, and we needed the funding to drive the capital process of getting ourselves ready and supply chain, et cetera. So, that's what we need to do. It was absolutely the right thing to do for the company at the time. So do I regret it? No, I don't regret it. Had I wish it played out maybe slightly differently? Perhaps, but listen, we're well funded. We've generated products in record time, and we're going into market. So, hopefully investors are happy with that.
I'm just going to ask you two more questions before we let you go. One being, you didn't talk today about the HCV or the military program in detail. Are these less important to the company?
No, not at all. I mean, obviously we've got limited time here to cover things, so I can't go into huge levels of detail on everything. and I guess there's no real particular updated news on either of those things beyond what we've already communicated. The U.S. program, it's growing and it's important to us. And I talked at the top of the presentation that we had we had sort of the intention from the military guys to enter into a long-term supply contract that would see around 500 gene drives purchased over 3 years. They haven't specified how many cartridges or tests are associated with that. But it's probably a circa $5 million opportunity. So again, very positive, and we've got the opportunity to grow to other users within the military as well. So, but I think we've probably talked about most of those things before. HCV, we recently achieved World Health approval, which is amazing. It took a lot longer than we would have hoped. It's not an easy process, but we did get there. But at the same time, back in March, we also like lots of companies did say, look, some of our traditional business is grinding to a halt because of coronavirus, and what we really need is for the world to return to normal a little bit, and we can get back to some of our other core businesses and promoting them as much as we possibly can. So I guess if there's a bit of a virtuous circle, that if we can get all of Africa and India to buy our high throughput coronavirus tests, they can help reduce the rate of infection, get the world back to normal, and then we can start talking to them about HCV.
Yeah. David, we're going to have a big mix of people listening to this webinar today. People who are already shareholders, people who maybe haven't yet got involved with the Genedrive story. The last question I'm going to ask you: what news flow can we expect from Genedrive in the coming weeks and months?
Certainly, I think the most critical thing, and something that I already mentioned, obviously, is sort of the commercial agreements and revenue side of the high throughput. I know everybody is hanging on that, and so I'll just ask people to have a bit of faith and confidence in what we're doing. I suppose so. That'll be the first thing, really. Significant commercial agreements or significant orders. We might announce distributors if they're significant. If they came with a significant value, maybe as an order commitment, or they were a recognized name, we might announce that. But we are working to establish lots of new channels, and we're certainly not going to announce everything. We talked briefly about our point of care test, so certainly we'll announce significant milestones as we get towards the end of the year. We are targeting end of the year for that product to be available. We'd probably announce approvals in relevant markets. I mentioned a couple of areas where we've targeted approvals. If and when those come through, we certainly would announce those. We mentioned the DoD entering into a long-term supply in the autumn, so that should be obviously that we would announce that. What else? AIHL, certainly Manchester and Liverpool. That trial needs to come to a conclusion. As I mentioned, it did slow down a little bit, but it has been a really good experience for us. So we'll be launching that product again, Inspiration Healthcare, in the autumn, and I guess finally ultimately the availability of the point of care test past the development end of the year, I think, is probably that's 6 months from now. So that's probably a reasonably good set of news flow for the next 6 months from us.
David, thank you very much for your time today. We'd also like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. If you would like to find out more about Turner Pope Investments and the services that we provide, please do visit our website at turnerpope.com. Until next time,